So the future's being arranged for us by a group of sort of tech oligarchs. And it's not just the technological future that they're arranging for us, it's also the political future. We know how close they are. We know that people like Peter Theil are funding Vance and Donald Trump. And we know that people like Zuckerberg and Musk, well, Musk was actually in the government, wasn't he, in the beginning, in the Trump administration. So we know that these two are kind of colliding. Remember how Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, hung out with Musk and did that tech conference? And think about Tony Blair Institute and how he's very interested in AI and sort of hanging out with Zuckerberg and the rest, you know. So there's a coming together of the two. This isn't news, boring. But recently I spent a bit of time, it was actually last week, with a few days kind of hanging out with these sort of CEOs of tech and communication, international communication companies. And I wouldn't say it was an eye-opener, but I did make a few observations which I think are worth sharing. I'll let you decide whether or not they are significant observations or whether, you know, it's not something that's particularly new. But bit of background though, which is that there's something a bit weird, isn't there, about these new breed of tech oligarchs who kind of are at the forefront of the future now, the ones that are in a way deciding, if not manipulating, what the future is going to look like. And we're kind of dragged into the vortex of this movement, this tech acceleration, whether we like it or not. And some of us, like old guys like me, we kind of fight against it a little bit. And then young people, like my kids, probably, you know, they embrace it. So kind of that's where we are. And that's a generalization, but I think there's an element of truth in that. But there is something weird about them. They have a kind of obsession with immortality to some extent. And I think what this is about is that having kind of transcended the normal struggles of kind of humanness, if you like, that you and I would probably have. Certainly they don't worry about noisy neighbours and they don't worry about electricity bills. I think we can assume that. So if you take that to the nth degree, take that to the solution where ultimately they're devoid of the normal issues that any living animal would have. They've elevated themselves above it. You know, if you're getting in, you know, a billion euros a month, then you're obviously in a slightly different place. I mean, let's not pretend that isn't so. To some extent, that is the truth, isn't it? And I think that when you get to that situation, I think that they believe they can transcend man in a kind of almost spiritual way, that they can sort of transcend human. They can become post-human themselves in some way. And then I think they have a vision for all of us, which I will talk about probably in part 2 of this. So I think that's quite interesting. And if you look at the characters involved, you'll see the same similar traits. Okay. So they don't care about success anymore. They don't give a damn about success. I mean, they've ticked every box in success. If you count success as being able to wake up every morning and determine your future, determine your day, they are already successful. But what they want is a kind of personal salvation as well. I don't think it's I think it's a parallel here when Putin and Xi of China apparently were overheard due to an eavesdropping microphone talking about longevity issues, talking about, you know, how body parts can be constantly replaced, and in theory, you know, we can live for another 200 years. There's something going on there as well. But back to the oligarchs, because the tech oligarchs, because I think they're looking for some kind of furtherance of their experience here in some way, some kind of, not just legacy actually. I think there's something personal going on as well. So they've elevated themselves beyond any normal life, and now they want to elevate themselves above the species. And this is kind of, we're starting to understand a little bit why they are so weird. Remember that they have total insulation insofar as they don't have any restrictions to their behavior at all anyway. So this is another thing. They're able to, there is no feedback that is really going to hurt them in any way. Like, you know, I could turn up at the office not wearing a suit and people would look down upon me. It's as simple as that. I have to get everything absolutely right. We have to get everything as social creatures right all the time. Otherwise we're eccentric, we're weird, we're crazy, we're unreliable, we're not consistent, all those kind of things. And so we have to play this endless game, okay, this social game of kind of being, you know, within the sort of parameters of normality. That's fine. Now, once you don't get that social feedback, or once it doesn't affect you, you know, you can be anything you want to be. You can say anything you want to say. You can do anything you want to do. It's like being given the license to be eccentric, if you like. Okay. So that's the. Sorry, I'm having to check someone. Also remember that tech to them is some form of religion. It's a kind of religious thing now. In this world we live in, of drama and of kind of everything has to be somehow kind of elevated from all of the other noise. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we think of it as a spiritual, religious kind of thing. And so if it's religious, what are they? Are they leaders of a religion? Or they're prophets, aren't they? They're prophets. They're kind of imagining a future for us, or, you know, telling us what is going to happen and how this will be absolutely great, you know. And of course, a lot of us, just to finish off, a lot of us sort of get our meaning from survival to some extent. I've already talked before about the fact that, you know, if you have an absence of meaning in your miserable lives, like I might do or anybody might do, you can always apply a very simple thought, which is that, okay, I have today, and it's meaningful to do things today that will make tomorrow a bit better. Now that makes sense. So, but that's all to do with survival and coping. They're not interested in survival and coping. It's not an issue for them. So they need a new frontier of meaning. And this is why they kind of go a little bit nuts. Now, you might say that this is kind of... I lost my track of thought there because somebody came in, so I've had to cut it, and now we're back. Okay, so let's take a few examples. Well, obviously, Elon Musk is... I don't need to tell you anything about him and his strange behaviour and the fact that, you know, he calls his children by a string of letters, and, you know, in a way he's trying to become a sort of post-human, outside of the ordinary, outside of the normal. You know, I'm not normal, I'm not ordinary, you know, I'm a prophet, you know, I'm of the future. And so there are little symbols that he leaves around about this. He's interested in going to Mars for whatever reason. He's interested in Neuralink, which is brain implantation, man and machine coming together, that kind of thing. He's interested in transhumanism, and you know, he wants to escape Earth and merge the human and the machine. Okay, so fine. Okay, let him get on with it. You know, whatever. Tony Stark thing. All right. But again, it's a kind of post-human, weird future world, isn't it? All right, which is either good or bad depending on how you look at it. That's for part two. Is this a good? Is this inevitable? Are we players? Are we agents? Do we have any agency in this, or are we just are we victims of this to some extent? Okay, let's find out. Now, Peter Theil. Well. Maybe I'll put a link to his latest antics, which is talking a lot with a series of lectures in San Francisco about about how to spot the Antichrist. It's all very weird. It's all very bizarre. There isn't the time to talk about that now. You can see it for yourself if you're interested. I'll put a link in. But it's all to do with biblical prophecy. And the Antichrist, you can, like he mentions people like Greta Thunberg, and you can see where we're coming from now. I think that the problem with him is that he believes that anyone who holds back progress, tech progress, and a future, a post-human future to some extent, is actually an Antichrist type figure. But it's all getting, it was all very weird and bizarre. And if you're interested in how far he's gone, it didn't really make any sense, but you could tell that this was somebody who literally was, well, not literally, but had decided to kind of leave planet Earth, really, in many respects. So again, it's about a sort of a destiny for all of us, which you and I would not necessarily recognise at the moment. Okay. All right. Brian Johnson, he sold his tech company some time ago, and then he's devoted his life now to an experiment on immortality, or if not immortality, certainly an extended lifespan, 150, 200 years. There's no point in me going into details about Brian Johnson. There was a big documentary made about him recently on Netflix, and if you're interested, you can look at that. But he is turning himself into a life social experiment, a life experiment, a biological experiment. Can he extend life by applying nutritional science and technology at an extreme degree to himself? And again, living forever, transcending the normal human experience, that sort of thing. As for someone like Zuckerberg, well, we got a kind of social engineering happening there, haven't we? Because people who are using, for example, some of the social apps that Meta are now controlling, Facebook is now just a kind of feedback loop. You end up in a tiny bubble where you're kind of supported in your choices according to your previous behaviour. So that feedback loop is going on. And even the metaverse itself tends to suggest a kind of overriding kind of philosophical approach to life, which is kind of different from before. It's kind of just, most of those things are involved in kind of people programming. I mean, that's exactly what it's about, isn't it? Because it's to do with advertising, it's to do with marketing, it's to do with getting you to do things whether you like them or not, to some extent, by understanding exactly who you are and what you want, and maybe even nudging you into areas that you hadn't considered before. And it's a metaverse. There's no escape from that, and of course, Jeff Bezos. I mean, there are many others. I'm just talking about the classics. Jeff Bezos and his Blue Origin thing again, shooting his wife off to space, getting off the Earth. What was it? Sort of post-human again, possibly, or the tech destiny. The destiny is the stars, not here. Not interested in here very much, are they? Imagine what they could do with that money. They don't really care about that. It seems anyway. You're getting the picture. So the point is what's actually going on. They're all searching a kind of cosmic meaning, aren't they? And a kind of tech destiny. I mean, they've watched too many sci-fi films, and now they're able to kind of, in a way, replicate some of those sci-fi films, whether it be Blade Runner or, The Fly, or, take your pick. It doesn't really matter. They haven't, I don't think time travel's come into it yet, but no doubt that will be the next step. They're creating myths in a way about the future as well, aren't they? They're selling us a kind of future concept. Robots doing everything, and everything automated, and artificial intelligence running. And they're not really saying whether this is a great thing but they seem to think that this is the destiny. This is the real world as it is. That this is where we're going. There's nothing we can do about it, which may well be true. Okay, so they're kind of unbounded. We're bounded. They're unbounded to some extent. So let's bring it on to what I was wanted to talk about very quickly at the end here is my own personal observations, because when I wasn't there in a professional capacity or anything. Okay, I was there purely by accident. Think of me like a barman who was listening in. I mean, that's how close it was. But there were a few things that I noticed were completely alien to my own way of thinking, are very different, and started me wondering whether or not this was kind of at the heart of a sort of distance from many of the things they're interested in, or why I feel a little bit of an outsider, perhaps, in some respects, because they're very comfortable people. Obviously, they're comfortable. They're very self-assured. They don't really have the sort of doubts that I would have, and I find that in itself was a bit peculiar. So when we do a critique of the way the world's going, for example, they're not interested in that. Have you noticed? They don't really do great social critiques, unless of course it interferes with their actual business plans. But like regulation. But they don't really think about how the impact of some of this stuff. It's kind of washed over, whereas we're obsessed with it. I have told you till I'm blue in the face about everybody now in the park is on their phone. They don't look at their children. They don't look at their dogs. They're bumping into each other, and it seems weird. And that's a visceral gut feeling. I'm not saying that is, it's just an observation. But for them, we don't judge other people's behaviour. Now, they know that everybody is at home watching Netflix and then getting a pizza delivered by a robot, by one of the star, I can't remember what they're called now, the vehicles, which they're everywhere in the city I live in. They know that everybody's on their phone all the time. They know their children are on their phone all the time. To the point where many national legislation across the entire world, national legislation is trying to stop children use phones in certain circumstances, either at school or they're not able to access apps until they're 14, 15, whatever. They don't care. For them, you must never judge other people's behaviour. So, people are on their phones all day, people are on their apps all day, people are getting robots delivered, food delivered by robots, everything. Who are we to judge? That's the first thing, okay? Now, there's some perfectly legitimate argument, you could make. But I always assumed to some extent that we were all concerned about the way the world was going. Well, they're not so concerned about the way the world is going. They like the way the world is going. So that was a bit weird. They also detest regulation. Now, this won't come as news to you, of course, but I was surprised by how much they hated regulation. But what was interested in is they like a little bit of regulation if it suits them. So their idea is that regulation is bad, and that's kind of a general kind of policy, general idea. They hate the EU because even though they can't say what the regulations are, they hate easily. But they don't like an organisation like the EU, which is churning out legislation, and equally they don't like government control. Okay, they don't like government legislation. And they don't they just want to be free. They just want to be free as architects of the future to do their business, okay? But they do like a little bit of legislation when it suits them. They don't want overseas competition quite a lot. They'd be quite happy to sort of, put tariffs here and there if it helped. In other words, any legislation that helps their business, that protects their business, then they're quite like that. But generally they don't. In other words, I think they've got a lot of ambiguity towards regulation too, but there you go. Insofar as regulation that suits them is fine, otherwise it's an evil. Trump. What do they think about Trump? Well, I was a bit surprised actually, because they don't really see Trump, in my opinion, from what I heard, which I thought was interesting. They don't care about Trump. Trump for them is just like for everybody. He's just this. He's a bit of he's just this idiot, this bumbling idiot, right? This confusing thing. But what they're interested in is the regime behind Trump, the movement that's happening without Trump even being there. Okay, and they like that. Okay, they like that. They like it. They like some of these aspects. And so they're not Trump. Who cares? But they quite like this whole idea of what's happening behind the scenes, and that was another thing. I don't want to get too involved in it, but the other thing is that we're always complaining about the world. That's what we do. I mean, we moan about the state of the world. We moan about everything, and you know, I would say for good reason. It's pretty awful. They don't. They live in the world as it actually is. They don't have any of that anxiety that we might have. They live in the world as it actually is. And that is, it's a very sensible place to be if you want to get everything done, because you don't waste any time trying to change things. You just take a cold, hard look at it and you say, this is the world. People want more and more and more, and we will give it to them. It's as simple as that. All right. So that was quite interesting. They know that people are greedy, that people have always been greedy, and people will always be greedy. And I've always thought that as a sort of moral question in a way, to some extent. Also something that, you know, could be argued that, you know, greed isn't good and that kind of thing. They don't care. They know that human nature is not going to change in any way. And that kind of, that refines their thinking a little bit about what they can and can't do. So that was a bit strange. And finally, one of the buzzword that was coming up was value-based realism. So value-based realism. Value-based realism. So what they think it means is that we have values, moral values, in everything we do. But we're also realists. And therefore, occasionally our moral values need to be tempered, adapted, softened, slightly changed because of the reality. In other words, you know, like we could say, I don't know, something like we need clothes, and yes, kids are making these clothes in Pakistan and Vietnam, but we have to have those clothes. There's no way we're going to get around that, and people will not buy. And if we don't buy clothes, we'll freeze to death. And so yes, we don't believe in child labour, but yes, occasionally we do actually need these things in order to survive. And so we have to kind of, you know, whatever. That would be one silly example and a classic old example, but you can see that it could be applied to anything, you know. Value-based realism. So, but that's what they say it is. The reality is, it's not that, is it, at all? It's a moral vacuum that they have, which they disguise as a kind of pragmatism. All right, well, that was my experience, but I'm going to leave it now. But I'm going to do a second part to this, because this was kind of a sort of just a chit-chat, really, about what I think about these tech oligarchs. But we could take it a step further, because I have a sense that there's something quite sinister happening, actually, and that their vision for the future, it doesn't include us. So next time.